What's worthwhile? Healing mind, body, and spirit. I'm Ramsey Zimmerman. I choose peace of mind, vitality of body, and joy of spirit over stress, exhaustion, or overwhelm. Together, let's explore and pursue the many ways to build holistic health and wellness.
So there's a few ways that HTMA can be used. One is like the way most people use it is just to check and see if somebody has excess heavy metal levels. But there is another way that it can be read to see. So minerals and metals interact very closely together in our bodies. And when we are deficient in a mineral, we are a lot more susceptible to having toxicities come in because there's a deficiency there in the first place.
Hey there, it's Ramsey here. That was Diane Yoder. Diane is a nutritional therapy practitioner and specializes in HTMA, which is hair tissue mineral analysis. When working with clients, we focus on supporting the foundations like nutrition, sleep, movement, and stress management. But it's also extremely useful to use diagnostic tools to understand if the body has enough of the minerals it needs or if the body has too many of the heavy metals it does not need. HTMA is great for both of these and even has several advantages to blood work, which is more commonly done. I had a great time speaking with Diane and learned a lot from her. Apologies in advance for my obsession with my own hair and deodorant. HTMA curious? Then let's have a listen. Hey Diane, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Yeah, I was excited for our meeting today.
Yeah, great. Well, I'm excited too. It's great to talk to you, and I'm excited because one of the main things that you do that you're into is hair tissue mineral analysis, or HTMA. And that's something that I've heard about but never really dug into before. So I'm really looking forward to picking your brain on that. But first, I'll just let folks listening know that you are a nutritional therapy practitioner and you're a health coach, and you've been practicing for about 6 years or so now. And how did you get into this field? Like what drew you personally into it?
Yeah, mostly, I always had kind of an interest in alternative ways to keep ourselves healthy, mostly through my mom and grandma kind of having interest in it. But probably the biggest thing was in my late teens, early 20s, I dealt with a lot of like depression, fatigue, just couldn't keep up with things. So I had a manager at my job that actually noticed that I wasn't able to keep up with my work very well. And she was really kind and kind of suggested, she was like, I think you could do a much better job if you actually felt better. And so she gave me some suggestions and things to try out and introduced me to a naturopath, and it really worked. So I was excited and intrigued and just kind of started studying and pursuing becoming a practitioner myself through the success that I had with that route.
Yeah, yeah. What did you learn that really sort of moved the needle for you? What were some of those early aha moments?
Yeah. I would say probably the intense fatigue. Like it had gotten so bad that it was just kind of a struggle to keep up even with daily tasks. That was a huge one. And then dealing with things like ADD along with it and everything, like it just felt like life was often a mess because of like low energy and disorganization. But that is one of the first things that probably improved was my energy levels. And when we have energy, we can make other changes that are necessary. So that
Yeah,
was probably one of the first things that was like noticeably different for me.
yeah, totally. What do you think? What are some of the things that you credit with, bringing back your energy levels?
Great question. Yeah. So the naturopath that I was working with, she kind of started with like the foundations, clean air, water, and good food, just the basics that we need as humans. So I changed my diet a little bit. She helped me know like how important protein is and, getting enough food in. A lot of us, we're living a busy lifestyle, aren't eating enough to even fuel our bodies properly. So that was a big one for me, was just starting with the foundations kind of. And then she did bring in some herbals and minerals and vitamins and things. But we really just started with more like nutrition, and some nervous system things like looking at emotions and learning how to process those. So we're not like always, carrying that load with us in the nervous system.
Yeah, those basic things, those foundations really make a ton of difference. And then sort of once you get, or maybe as you are getting to a stable place, then you can look deeper and see sort of what's going on in a more uh, in a broader way. And is that where, HTMA starts playing in? Like, what is that? And explain sort of how that fits in.
Right. Yeah. So after I had been with the naturopath for a while, I actually joined a mentorship with her class of students where I became a practitioner myself. And in that class, she kind of introduced HTMA to us. A lot of people will use it mostly as a tool to check and see if we have heavy metals, because that's one thing that we can check on the test. So I kind of learned about it through that process. But after I graduated and was kind of, figuring out what I want to use in my own practice, it's something that I kind of started digging into a little bit more and reading up more, testimonials of people that had used it. And I started trying it on myself and really liked what I saw and, noticed with it in my own body. So after that, I went on and did more studies to become certified as an HTMA practitioner, just kind of with how I liked feeling on the program. So that's kind of how I got into it, I guess, is it was a longer
Yeah.
timeline, but yeah.
So, from a practical sense, what are we talking about? So, describe sort of the process, describe what, how they do analysis. I mean, we're basically talking about collecting some hair samples,
Right.
right? And then sending them off to the lab. So, describe a little bit about what that looks like from a practical sense.
Sure. Yeah. The test itself is super easy to do. One thing that a lot of people like is they can do it at home without seeing anybody. It doesn't involve any needles or pain. So basically, you just send in a small sample of your hair, about a teaspoon worth. It varies a little bit depending on the weight of one's hair. And when the lab gets it, they'll process it. Takes about 2 weeks for that process to happen. And then they send the results back and it'll kind of show, your mineral levels, how the body is functioning based off of how those levels are balancing together. And then it also does look at heavy metals, but that part is a little bit trickier than just initially looking at it. But that's kind of like the initial process, what it would look like as far as it basically, you just cut a small piece of hair and send it to the lab. So it's super easy to perform.
And why is it such a powerful tool? Like, what is it about? Um, what do you learn from it?
Right. Yeah. I love this question because it's kind of an interesting one. So there's a few ways that HTMA can be used. One is like the way most people use it is just to check and see if somebody has excess heavy metal levels. But there is another way that it can be read to see. So minerals and metals interact very closely together in our bodies. And when we are deficient in a mineral, we are a lot more susceptible to having toxicities come in because there's a deficiency there in the first place. So kind of the best way I know to describe it is thinking of all your minerals kind of being in a group of its own, and the mineral amounts that we have determine how much energy our systems have to do the job that they need to do. So ideally, we would be getting all those minerals through our food and, water that we drink. But unfortunately, that's rarely the case nowadays anymore, even if we're eating really well. Farming has gotten different and we're not getting as much through the nutritious foods that we should be getting. So I have done hundreds of tests to date, and I've never seen anybody with their minerals all within ideal ranges. So we can see where the deficiencies are starting. And when we see the deficiency, that can also give us a good look. Is it, stressing the adrenals or the thyroid? Is the digestive system not able to work properly? For example, we need zinc and sodium to be able to make hydrochloric acid for our stomach to be able to digest food. So if those are really low, we might be needing digestive enzymes temporarily, and we would be looking at increasing those minerals in our diet. So it's kind of a whole process where the minerals all work together. And it's not quite as simple as just looking at zinc and being like, oh, zinc is low, let's go give a bunch of zinc, because every single mineral will impact another mineral. So we can also deplete some minerals if we give too much of one. So it kind of comes into this piece where we need to look at how all the minerals are functioning together. And based off of that, we can determine the body's metabolic rate, how much stress it can handle, if it's in burnout, what level of burnout it's in, and then start correcting those levels based off of what we're seeing on the tests. I don't know. Does that make sense? I know it's kind of like a rabbit trail, but
Sure. Yeah, no, is do all of the minerals that we need in our body, do they show up in hair?
yes, most of them. Obviously, there's some of like the smaller minerals that I work with ARO Labs, which is based in Phoenix. They do not test all of the like tiny minerals that are more, we need them in much smaller amounts, but all of the main minerals that we need are tested in the hair. There are labs that will test the smaller amounts of minerals. I think Trace Elements Labs will test those. But yes, all the minerals can be found in hair that are in your body.
How does HTMA compare to like doing blood work?
Yes, yes. So there's a couple ways that it's not very comparable. So, for example, our blood is what is keeping us alive every second of every day. So, it has to be somewhat regulated. So, your body is going to work really, really hard to make that your blood is as good as possible. So, a lot of times when there are higher levels of metals, for example, if you do blood work, it won't really show up in the blood work unless there was like an acute exposure that just happened recently. And then it would come up in the blood because the body's still working on filtering it out. But basically, the blood is always going to try to be as stable as it can because it has to. But hair is a good place where the body can actually push in toxicities and it's not going to affect anything, which is one of the reasons why it's such a great way to measure, toxic metals. And at the same time, the minerals will also get pushed into the hair. So a lot of times, based off of the amounts of minerals that are getting pushed into the hair, we can kind of see or detect problems before they become, huge problems in the blood because it'll show up in hair before in blood. So there's some things that, hair will not pick up. And same with blood, there's things that blood won't pick up. So they both have advantages and disadvantages. But the biggest thing is the hair will definitely pick up a lot more toxicities because the body can afford pushing it into the hair. And then it'll typically detect low minerals way before it will ever show up in the blood because the blood is going to be working super hard to keep the levels as okay as it can at all times at the cost of other things in our body.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. That hadn't occurred to me. So it's like the body is sort of dumping heavy metals into your hair, which is sort of the most extraneous part of you, I guess.
Yes.
And yeah, the body would need to, works really hard to maintain homeostasis of all kinds of things in the blood, because yeah, it's so vital. That's really
Right.
interesting. Um, I think I just called hair extraneous, but I think a lot of people feel exactly the opposite. People feel really, very sensitive about their hair and want to keep it and not have big bald patches. Is there sort of an issue? Are people funny about getting their hair, cut for HTMA work?
Yes, it's a great question. So I've had very few people, be hesitant to do the test because of that, but I've had it happen a few times. I would say the most common is if there's somebody getting their young child tested, and let's say their first haircut hasn't come around yet. That's very emotional to be, cutting off a bunch of hair, but you're not ready to do it. And then sometimes people do have, thinning hair, or like you said, they don't have bald patches and they're concerned about it. Thankfully, you don't need a lot of hair and we don't have to take the root of the hair out. So we just cut it so it does grow back. I always recommend that if someone is getting the test done, that they have a friend or family member help them cut it so you don't cut off, unnecessary amounts because you can't see where you're going or something like that. But it's typically not a huge issue if you follow the directions pretty closely. It doesn't take that much hair.
Yeah, and I saw some diagrams, I think, of like how to do it, and it was like sort of right on the nape of your neck, right? Kind of
Yes.
underneath. And I think they said that the part of your hair that's like just, the first inch or two sort of next to the scalp, things like that. Am I remembering that right? Like, let's talk more about sort of how you collect hair.
Yes, for sure. Yeah, you got it right. It's like you definitely want the hair that's the closest to the scalp. I typically recommend not going more than an inch away from the scalp for what you send to the lab, mostly because if somebody has long hair and you take off the end of the hair, that hair might have been there, 2 years ago, and it would be taking more of a picture of where your health was at 2 years ago versus today. So we want to get it as close to the scalp as possible. And typically, like you mentioned, kind of at the bottom of the scalp area tends to be the most accurate. But I've definitely had people, have to go up higher depending on like the type of haircut they have. For men, that's more common if you have like shaved more towards the bottom and longer hair on the top. And it can still be pretty accurate, if you have to do it that way.
Some of us men that are 50 years old have very little hair up on the top. Most of my hair is either sort of at my neck or in my bangs, but we're not talking about me.
Yeah. Yeah, there's definitely ways around it. If someone doesn't have a lot of hair, there's people that use armpit hair sometimes. I
Ooh,
try to avoid that if at all possible. It doesn't tend to be as accurate and,
oh, that's why.
student. Yeah, I know. Yeah.
Well, what about like products? I mean, people put lots of products in their hair too. Wouldn't that be like a contaminant?
Right. Yes, for sure. The lab recommends like washing your hair before taking the sample. They'll actually recommend washing with like a distilled water or a store-bought spring water to make sure that, let's say somebody has a high level of metal coming through their drinking water, hopefully that's not the case, but it does happen. Like if somebody has copper water pipes, the that's going to contaminate the sample to look like they have super high copper levels, but it might not be internal, it's more of an
Yeah.
external contamination. So buying the water and washing at least 3 times with that water to make sure there's no external contamination is a great way to avoid issues with your own water. And then usually any shampoo is okay and a conditioner. Besides the Selsun Blue shampoo or the Head and Shoulders, those naturally contain selenium and zinc. So it'll elevate those levels to abnormal amounts. But avoiding those two, typically other shampoos and conditioners are okay for the most part.
Okay. Um, we've mentioned a couple of times about heavy metals. What are some of the, significant heavy metals that the test often finds, and kind of what are the impacts of those metals on people's bodies?
Yeah. I love the topic of metals because they're so fascinating, but essentially, I have never done any tests that somebody didn't have any metals at all. So we all have a little bit. It just is in the environment with, water, foods, things like that. And a lot of it actually gets passed on to us before we're even born. Like if a woman has higher levels of metals, but we're also having deficiencies at the same time, those metals will pass to the placenta and baby accumulates some before they're even born. So most of us, before we were even, here, had a larger amount than what, some of our ancestors would have had. But one of the most common metals that we will see is aluminum. It just tends to pop up on every single test. some people have more than others, but it's probably the one that I've never seen any test without any aluminum at all. So that tends to be the one that is probably the most out of all the tests.
And aluminum, what are some of the common sources of aluminum that people are from which people are getting aluminum?
Yeah. So a lot of aluminum can come through drinking water, and it's probably not going to be just like all the time, but it can have been, earlier in childhood, you might have gotten it and if the body wasn't able to get rid of it, and then it keeps accumulating. Really common sources would be like foods that are in tin cans. As it gets cooked, a little bit of that aluminum leaches into the food. Soda that's in tin cans, the carbonation causes the can to leach more metals, the acidity. A couple other things like Velveeta cheese tends to be really high in aluminum. Not really a
One more
surprise.
reason not to eat Velveeta cheese. Sorry.
Yeah. But foods that most of us in childhood probably ate quite a bit of. I don't know, about other people I know it was really common in our house growing up. A lot of the processed foods for sure. And then less commonly known will be things like baking powders, baking sodas, conventional salts that you just like get at the grocery store. It's used as an anti-caking agent in some of those
Mm.
products. So those would be some of the really basic ones, I guess. And
Well,
then,
speaking of armpit hair, what about aluminum in like deodorant and antiperspirant?
yes, that's a big one for sure. Yeah. Yeah,
Is
definitely.
Yeah, it's like I've sort of seen that. It hasn't prevented me from wearing deodorant, but it seems like I occasionally or from time to time run into things that say you shouldn't use products with the aluminum in it. Do you have an opinion about that?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's tricky because you don't want to go without, like, if you're going to a meeting or something, it can be one of those things where you kind of weigh the pros and cons of it, maybe. But definitely nowadays there's more available than there used to be even like 5 years ago. It was harder to get like deodorants without aluminum in them. I would say, if you do a little bit of shopping, there's brands that will like kind of specialize in avoiding the aluminum part of it, but then you also kind of run into doesn't always work as well, so it kind of depends. But I would say weigh the pros and cons and
Yeah.
yeah, do what's best for each individual on that.
Be considerate of the people around you, and
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
I can take a micro dose of aluminum today just in order to be presentable.
Right. Yes.
Um, uh, is HTMA good for all ages? I mean, what about like kids, grown-ups, seniors? Is it the kind of thing where, especially metals, like they accumulate over time, right?
Right.
So, do you recommend it for certain ages over others, or you like across the board?
Yes. So my oldest client is in their 70s and my youngest client is about a year old. So it can definitely be used across all ages. The hardest is if a child is really young and, sometimes babies don't have a lot of hair. So sometimes we have to wait until they're 1 or 2 years old until they have enough hair. That is the biggest, probably, block sometimes with being able to use it on really young children. But for the most part, it's a great tool for anybody looking to get their levels checked because people that like to avoid needles, with blood work, we have to use the needles. And I'm not against blood work. I also use that in my practice. But if you're just looking to start at a basic place, it can be done, in the comfort of your own home. And it's completely painless and pretty easy to prepare for. So it's a great fit for all ages.
Yeah, cool. And are these tests really expensive?
No, not at all. Comparable to blood work and other tests that I work with, they're actually one of the most affordable tests. And they really make it sustainable that a person can use it long term to keep up with their levels just because of the affordability overall. I mean, it
Cool.
depends a little bit where someone is located, and maybe each practice might have different pricing on it. But overall, I would have said the cost is very affordable when you compare it to a lot of other functional medicine tests.
Yeah. How does how does HTMA work into the context of kind of what you do and all the other things that you do with your customers and clients? Like, is it at the beginning? Is it somewhere in the middle? Is it something that you only do with certain people? Like, how does it fit into the bigger picture of how you sort of help your clients?
Yeah. So it depends a little bit on where someone's starting out. If you're starting and somebody has not made any dietary changes and they're just kind of starting from square one, like I was in the beginning when I got into natural health, I always like to start with like the basics, like make sure that you're getting good food, getting fresh air outdoors, moving our body a little bit if we can, just some of those basics. I like starting with that, looking at the emotional piece just because that's really important as humans as well. But I usually bring the HTMA in pretty quickly because it's also like for me, it was really hard to sometimes make the necessary changes when my energy was just so incredibly low. And the test can really quickly tell us, what we can bring in to help your systems have more energy to help us even make better choices from there. So I typically bring it in pretty quickly in someone's process with their health, just to get a look at what does a body need to be able to function well.
And then we've really talked about two things. One is deficiencies of minerals, and the other is toxicity from heavy metals. Uh, what do you do about each one of those? So
Right.
let's take them each in turn. So if you have an acute deficiency with minerals, do you jump to supplements? Do you look at diet, some combination? Like, talk me through that a bit.
Sure. I mean, I like a combination of both. That's just my personal approach to it because I do believe our bodies are designed to function with food. Like we were made to have food. The food was designed to be healthy for us and feed us. And so I like to start with that. It's really hard to just throw a bunch of supplements at a problem and have that fix it. So I do think at the same time, our food is not what it used to be, unfortunately. We get a lot more contaminations with, the processed foods, and even the homegrown organic foods have less nutrients because of our soils being more depleted from modern farming. So that's kind of another story for another day. But at the same time, sometimes we do need to bring in some added nutrients that we're not getting through the food anymore. So I like to use a combined approach where I use the food and the supplements based off of what the test is showing me that they need, kind of.
Yeah. And then how about the heavy metals? How do you get heavy metals out of a person?
Right. So typically with the test, my approach is helping the body become much more resilient, helping the body's own systems be able to do their job really well because our body is designed to heal, it's designed to detox, and it's designed to work well. But if we give it the missing pieces, it is very likely able to do that on its own. So you probably have heard of things like heavy metal cleanses and things like that. Um, there's a time and a place for them, but it's not really how I approach heavy metal toxicity. I will typically start focusing on the deficiencies first. So, kind of like we were talking about the metals or the minerals all working together with each other, there is this thing called ionic mimicry where the metals have a very similar effect as the minerals. So let's take magnesium, for example. If someone's really low in magnesium and they get exposed to some aluminum, that aluminum can go into the places where the magnesium's supposed to be. And the best analogy that I can think of is one that my teacher gave me one time. It's kind of like maybe you're driving through the desert and the fan belt leaves your car breaks. And so you're trying to still get somewhere. Maybe you're wearing like a belt on your jeans. So you take it off and somehow tie it together. I don't know how well that would logically work, but you kind of get somewhere where they can help you fix your car. So, and you're really grateful you got there. It was probably a bumpy ride, not the most fun, but that's basically what happens when you have mineral deficiency and the metals come in and are sitting in the spots where the minerals are supposed to be. So aluminum is then going to start to run on that mineral transporter and start running some of the systems where magnesium should be there. So we'll still be alive, we'll still be functioning, but we're going to have days where we don't feel really well. And the system is not able to do exactly what it's designed to do because what's coming through on the transporter is not what's supposed to be there. Is that making sense so far?
Yeah. Well, it's sort of like it's using the duct tape and baling wire to sort of keep the thing together and keep it running, but it doesn't mean that it's going to run well. It just means
Right.
you're not going to completely break down.
Exactly. But
Um,
yeah, my approach typically is then to bring in the minerals that are low. And once you replenish those minerals, the minerals will actually push those metals out. So when we do your next hair sample, then you can actually track it. Like the aluminum starts rising on the test, not because you're getting in contact with more aluminum, but your body's immune system, the adrenals, the thyroid are having more energy, so they can actually afford to push that out. And now those systems have more magnesium to run on. So it's kind of like fighting bad with good instead of like forcing the metals to come out and then those spaces just stay inefficient. And we might feel slightly better temporarily, but then become more fatigued because there's still nothing in that spot to replenish it. Um, it's kind of a crude analogy, but it's the best way I know to describe it.
well, and that's really interesting for a number of reasons too, because let's say you have this test with aluminum and then you get the next test and it's like even more aluminum. You have to, have some expertise around, reading and understanding what the tests are telling you to know that fact of, well, actually, it's probably because your body is getting rid of aluminum instead of being exposed to more of it. So is
Right.
it fairly sort of complicated to kind of read and understand what is going on with these tests and the results?
Yes. A little bit. Like if I would recommend, anybody that's interested in learning about it, doing a specialized course in how to read it to check how the body's systems are running based off of the mineral levels. Once you kind of know that part, it's not actually difficult at all. It's pretty easy. But if you just look at the test and you're like, this number is low and this number is high, so it means low and high, kind of like we would look at blood work, it's definitely not read the same way. There's a lot of nuances with how the numbers are presenting. But if someone has a little bit of training, it can be pretty easy to read, but definitely not just looking at it once at face value. That would not really be helpful. Yeah.
So if somebody is HTMA curious, where would you sort of recommend that they start to learn more and begin to understand what's going on? Do you have some of those resources, or are there places that you would recommend?
Yeah. Are you talking more like if somebody's interested in like becoming a practitioner for it or more just like looking at using it for their health?
Well, it's not necessarily a practitioner, but let's say somebody who's interested in learning a bit about the science, but mostly because, they're considering having that work done.
Right. Yeah. So there's quite a bit of resources available. I would recommend reading the book called Energy by Dr. Paul Eck. It's a really easy read and it kind of explains how everything functions off energy. Like if our systems don't have energy, they can't do what they're supposed to. So it's just a really great read and very easy to digest. I'm trying to think of some other resources like ARL Labs has a section that's called newsletters. That's a really great place to read up on what specific metals will do and what the different metabolic patterns will kind of feel like in your system. And then my own website, you can look a little bit on testimonials, how it's helped people. I personally don't have as much information on how it works, but I'm
Hmm.
always happy to do like a consult call if someone's interested in learning.
Yeah, that's great. So, what is your website? How do people get a hold of you? How do they reach you and, start working with you?
Yeah, my website is northwestnatural.health, and people can also reach out to me by email. My email's dianeyoder2020@gmail.com. And those are probably the two best ways to get a hold of me.
Fantastic. Well, hey, Diane, thanks so much for coming in today and teaching us all about HTMA and sharing your story. I appreciate it, and it was a lot of fun.
Yes, thank you so much.
Looking for more? Visit what'sworthwhile.net to listen to podcast episodes, learn from books and articles, and live better by choosing healthy products and practices. I'm now offering services through Worthwhile Advisors for personal coaching, professional advising, speaking, and group facilitation. If you or your team are ready to reduce stress and anxiety, build vitality and momentum, and accomplish your goals without burning out, then please contact me, Ramsey Zimmerman, through the website or on social media like Instagram, X, or LinkedIn. Thanks.